I want to welcome you to the first session of the CCMS Inc. course, Interactive Ethics, which is based on the book Interactive Ethics, How Ethical and Unethical Decisions Are Really Made in Organizations by myself, Tom Shear. If you wish to get a copy of the book, you can go to our website at http://www.ccmsinc.net, where you can also get a copy of the course's outline on the Interactive Ethics course page. If you wish to take this course for 24 hours of continuing education credit for NADAC, NBCC, OASIS, and KDAC, California, you can go to our online store from the website and contact me at tschear@ccmsinc.net. This first session covers the first 3 chapters of the book. The first chapter briefly summarizes the original interactive ethics model, which I first came across in a packet of materials provided by the instructor of an ethics course, which I was taking while attending the University of Iowa back in the late 1980s. The second chapter examines the prescriptive approach to ethical decision-making, with its emphasis on ethical principles, codes of ethics, and step-by-step decision-making processes. Chapter 3 introduces you to the interactive model, as I have modified it over the years while teaching several courses on ethics and managing a couple substance abuse programs. During this session, I will be defining the various terms, concepts, and parts of the model, which will be used as we move forward. So, let's get started by going to slide 1. Slide 1 describes the original interactive ethical model, starting with the ethical dilemma at the far left, which, if you follow the arrow A, first stops at what the model calls cognitions. Keep following the arrow and you finally end up at the ethical/unethical decision behavior on the far right. The cognitions in this model are understood to be Kohlberg's stages and levels of cognitive moral development, which we'll cover in some detail later. Individual moderators in the box at the very top of the page include ego strength, field dependence and independence, and locus of control. Situational moderators, indicated in the box at the bottom of the page, include broad categories of immediate job context, characteristics of the work, and organizational culture. All these terms will be defined later in the session when we discuss the modified model. As you can tell from the direction of the arrows, the original model suggests that the facts of the ethical dilemma pass through the cognitions. That is to say, the dilemma is responded to in a way that is consistent with the person's level of moral development. However, as arrow B suggests, going from the individual moderator's box to line A, the individual additionally brings their ego strength, field dependence and independence, and locus of control into the situation, which influences the events as they unfold. Correspondingly, the situational moderators, understood to be coming from the workplace, impact or moderates first by impacting the level of moral development at which the individual is able to respond to the dilemma, indicated by arrow C, and second, it further influences the outcome indicated by arrow B, going from that box to line A. Note that the movement is only in one direction, from the dilemma to the cognitions to the outcome, with individual and situational moderators influencing and impacting the final decision. The modified model, which we will go through later, demonstrates that it is not a one-way street, but that there are true interactions and influences that eventually bring someone to the final outcome, the final decision, whether it be ethical or unethical. Now, on to slide 2. Slides 2 through 6 come from the chapter 2, illustrating the how-to, or the prescriptive, path from the ethical dilemma to the final outcome. Slide 2 spells out this process in some detail. Again, on the far left is the ethical dilemma, and on the far right is the final outcome. In the middle there are 3 boxes. Code of ethics, conduct in the top box, the step-by-step decision-making process in the middle, and ethical principles at the bottom. The arrows go between the various boxes in a way to suggest that there's interaction between these various elements. Starting at the far left is the dilemma. You know that it is an ethical dilemma to the extent that you are aware of the codes of ethics and or the ethical principles, as indicated by arrow A. Once the dilemma has been recognized, the step-by-step decision-making process kicks in, indicated by the arrow D, going from the dilemma box to the process box. Notice that the arrows point in both directions as the code and the principles help identify that there is indeed a dilemma, and the dilemma is demanding attention. The application of the code and the principles are guided by the step-by-step decision-making process, arrows B and C, as each influences and is influenced by the other. Finally, arrow D continues to the right, leading to the final outcome. Slide 3 is described in greater detail in the book, but you'll note that as the arrows point in both directions, away and from, the ethical dilemma suggests the code and the principles help identify the existence of and the nature of the ethical dilemma, while at the same time the dilemma demands the application of the code and the principles to it. The trick is knowing which elements of the code and of the principles should be applied, how they should be applied, and what to do if there are apparent contradictions between the various assertions of the code and or the principles. Slide 4 lays out 2 examples of step-by-step decision-making processes. In my reading of such strategies, I came across a broad range of such strategies, ranging from 5 to as many as 19 steps. Each of them has essentially the same goals. First, to help you make sure that all your bases are covered. And second, to bring a level of order to what can be an emotion-laden and or at least an ambiguous situation. Slide 5 of the how-to process adds in the element of the decision-making process, as it provides structure to the application of the code and the principles and brings to mind other elements in the situation that need to be considered as the dilemma is resolved. Slide 6 indicates a more direct relationship with an impact between these 3 elements as they finally lead to an ethical outcome, or at least the most ethical outcome possible. In a perfect world, following the prescriptive process would likely lead to much less legal wrangling, lawsuits, breaches of ethics, court appearances, and out-of-court settlements, etc., etc. Unfortunately, the fact is that the how-to model can only go so far in explaining what happens when individuals working with co-workers and supervisors in the context of an organization, and an organization itself, as all of them are facing an ethical dilemma. Sometimes the challenges are identifying small ethical dilemmas, which, if ignored or minimized or addressed only in passing, can eventually snowball into a much bigger dilemma later on. Aside from such neglect, there is also the willful breach of ethical and legal bounds. We are all familiar, either by having worked in such an organization or by just watching the television, to see organizations and individuals who work within those organizations who have committed the most obvious acts and breaches of ethics and legality. This happens, and it doesn't seem to matter whether the business is for profit or if it is an organization intended to serve some public good. And it seems that no amount of good intentions or careful thought out decision-making processes or good ethics or principles none of these things seem to affect what eventually happens in many ways. So there must be a missing element. The interactive ethical model introduces you to those elements starting with slide 7.